A 12-year-old boy stood watching as an iron shovel connected with another child's skull, the metallic ring echoing through the dinner room. Blood pooled on the floor. That night crystallized everything Brown's Calvinist parents had taught him about slavery being an abomination. He'd heard the words countless times, but this was different. This was real. Standing there in that room, Brown made a silent vow he would wage eternal war against slavery. Fast forward to the 1850s. America was tearing itself apart. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required Northerners to capture and return escaped slaves. Brown couldn't stomach it. He formed the League of Gileadites, an armed group protecting escaped slaves from bounty hunters. Then came Kansas. Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, letting settlers vote on free or slave state. Both sides flooded in. Brown's 5 sons were among the anti-slavery settlers, and they wrote begging their father to come help. Initially, he refused, but by October 1855, he couldn't ignore the call. He loaded a wagon with rifles, pistols, and swords and headed west. Kansas became a powder keg. On May 21, 1856, pro-slavery forces sacked the town of Lawrence. The next day, Representative Preston Brooks beat Senator Charles Sumner nearly to death with a cane on the Senate floor. These high-sue keens shattered something inside the 55-year-old Brown. His whole life, he'd hoped the South would see reason. The year was 1812, and young John Brown had just witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life and ultimately change the course of American history. The so-called abolitionists in the North did nothing but talk. Slavery would only end through force. On the night of May 24, 1856, Brown led a group, including his sons, to the home of pro-slavery settler James Doyle. The men complied nervously and were led 100 yards into darkness. Under moonlight, Brown's sons hacking the Doyles to pieces. Brown himself fired a pistol point blank into James Doyle's forehead. They visited 2 more houses that night. The Potawatomi massacre kicked off what became known as Bleeding Kansas. Brown became public enemy number 1. Bounties piled up on his head, but he didn't back down, leading his militia in multiple battles. He became a polarizing national figure, a hero to some in the North, a deranged lunatic to the South. By year's end, it looked like Kansas would join as a free state. Brown left as a wanted man. But leaving Kansas didn't mean Brown was done. What he planned next would make everything seem small. In August 1859, Brown met his old friend Frederick Douglass in an abandoned stone quarry. Brown had driven a herd of cattle over 100 miles to deliver them to a U.S. Marshal. Brown revealed a plan inspired by Moses and Spartacus. He believed American slaves would rise up. He planned to raid the federal armory at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, and spark a massive slave insurrection. Douglass couldn't believe it. Attacking a federal building would be suicide. He was God's instrument, and this act would signal to every slave that their liberation had begun. Douglass tried to dissuade him, but Brown's mind was made. They parted ways. An escaped slave who'd accompanied him agreed to join the mission. They shook hands and said goodbye. October 16, 1859, John Brown and his 18 men moved through Harper's Ferry like shadows. They cut telegraph lines, seized the federal arsenal, took Lewis Washington hostage. The arsenal held over 100,000 rifles, enough to arm a rebellion. Now they just had to wait. But that's not what happened. Word spread to militias. Brown's men found themselves surrounded. Impressed by the boy's grit, the marshal invited him to stay a few days before making the long trek back to Ohio. By the next morning, Brown's men were surrounded. He'd waited too long for an army that never materialized. Firefights erupted. President Buchanan ordered U.S. Marines to the scene. He placed Army Colonel Robert E. Lee in command. Marines stormed the engine house. Within minutes, they overwhelmed the raiders. John Brown lay wounded on the floor. Brown was charged with treason and murder. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty. When asked if he had anything to say, Brown rose from his seat. He denied any wrongdoing. He closed with these words, "Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life, I submit. So let it be done." December 2nd, 1859, the day of his execution. Stonewall Jackson and Jeb Stuart stood watching. Also present was John Wilkes Booth. Brown handed a scrap of paper to his jailer. On it, he'd written, "The crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood." Inside the marshal's home, Brown met an enslaved boy around his age. They became fast friends, playing together and exchanging small handmade gifts. He was right. Within a year, the Civil War erupted. 750,000 Americans would die. Union soldiers marched singing John Brown's Body. It was rewritten as the battle hymn of the Republic. You know it better as Glory, Glory, Hallelujah. Louisiana, 1983. Gary Plauché drives his 10-year-old son Jody to karate practice. Gary's proud of his son's progress, but he also feels bad for Jeff, who's clearly struggling financially. So Gary starts inviting Jeff over for dinner. Jeff becomes a close family friend. For Jody, having a cool older friend around constantly was awesome. They go to movies together. To Gary, it's great that his son has a role model he can trust. That trust is about to be shattered. February 14th, 1984. Jeff asked to borrow the car to visit his uncle. Can Jody come along? Hours later, Jeff calls. They're staying at his uncle's. Tomorrow comes. They don't return. At dinner that evening, the marshal praised Brown in front of guests, beaming with pride as if he were his own son. The meal was wonderful, filled with laughter and warmth. They contact police, who begin searching. No trace. Gary's worry transforms into dread. Police launch a nationwide search. 2 weeks pass. No sign of Jody or Jeff. Gary's wife receives a collect call from a motel in Anaheim, California. She picks up. Jody's voice comes through. Thank God. He's alive. Anaheim officers storm the Samoa Hotel. They find Jody with Jeff. Jeff is arrested. Jeff drove all the way to California. Disneyland kept him locked in motels at night. Police fly Jody home. Gary sees his son step off that plane and rushes over. Jody undergoes a medical examination. Police inform Gary that Jeff wasn't the man they thought. The examinations showed evidence of molestation. Detectives interview Jody. He tells them Jeff had been abusing him for over a year. He was too scared to tell. But when the last guest left, everything changed. The marshal's face darkened. He turned on the enslaved boy, berating him for minor mistakes during service. When Gary hears this, everything inside him breaks. Guilt, rage. He'd handed his son directly to a predator. Then the guilt transforms into pure rage. Gary decides no court punishment could ever be enough. He'll make sure justice happens. Jeff is charged with kidnapping and molestation. Gary waits for proceedings. Gary starts visiting a local bar, trying to drown his suffering in alcohol. His rage builds with each passing hour. Nothing will undo what happened to Jody. One night, a friend from a TV station mentions Jeff will be flown back on March 16th. American Airlines Flight 595. Gary's eyes widen. He knows exactly what to do. March 16th. Gary walks into Baton Rouge Airport disguised. He positions himself at payphones. News crews begin arriving to film Jeff's return. Then he grabbed that iron shovel from the fireplace and began beating the child viciously. Police escort Jeff through the airport. Gary keeps his head turned away. You're about to hear a shot. He drops the receiver. Gary draws a revolver. Gary fires a single bullet straight into Jeff's head as he walks by. Police freeze in shock. Officers rush in, grab the shooter, instantly recognize him. Gary, why Gary? Gary doesn't resist arrest. Jeff dies the following day. The assassination was filmed live. It became national news. The footage spreads everywhere. Public reaction splits. Many identify with the father's desperate quest for revenge. Gary is tried for murder. He accepts a plea bargain to manslaughter. No sentence would satisfy him. The judge rules no risk of Gary reoffending. Brown could only watch, helpless, as his new friend was struck again and again. The smell of blood filled the room. He never spends a day in prison. If somebody did it to your kid, you'd do it too. That statement resonates with parents across America. The restraint required not to do the same. Where's the line between justice and revenge? The system fails to protect children. The footage still exists online. Disturbing to watch, even knowing the context. Imagine yourself in his position, discovering they spent a year destroying your child. His answer was a single bullet. The legal system gave him a slap on the wrist. Sometimes a father's rage speaks louder than any courtroom. Ordinary people, extraordinary acts. Sometimes they change history forever.